Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 74. Sejal Thakkar raises awareness about biases. Here's a shout out to those in India, in particular from Manipur, Delhi, Odisha, Daman and Diu, Rajasthan, and Assam. With that, let's get started. Do you want to reduce harassments, microaggressions, and the effects of biases in your workplace? If so, then you should talk to the Chief Civility Officer. That, of course, is Sejal. From legal counsel to training people how to reduce workplace harassment, Sejal has helped countless numbers of executives, managers, and individual contributors change the culture where they work and for the better. And if you haven't done so, go to the show notes and check out the TEDx that I posted there, and you'll hear Sejal's amazing story. Part 1. Reducing Microaggressions in the Workplace. One of the principles I write about is develop leadership practices continuously. If you're going to become fluent in leadership, you have to practice leadership regularly and monitor your effectiveness. Part of that development and self-monitoring involves understanding your unconscious biases and even how the brain works. If we're going to connect with others and build trust, we really need a better understanding of how the brain works and the good and the bad about biases. In this story, Sejal begins to explain unconscious biases and what that involves with a story about growing up in an Italian neighborhood. Here's Sejal.
I would like to share with you a little bit about some advice that my dad gave me when I was growing up. My parents were immigrants from India. They moved here in 1974. I grew up in a predominantly Italian neighborhood, and I dealt with harassment and discrimination at a pretty young age. Back then, this was years ago, there wasn't, and even now, there isn't a lot of support for people when you're dealing with harassment, discrimination, or bullying. And my father was really the one person that I would have conversations with about what I was feeling. A couple of things he said to me during that time were really important in how they shaped my life and really helped me become who I am today. One of the things he would always say is, when people hurt others, they themselves are hurting inside. And then he would always remind me that we're all capable of being hurtful or treating others badly. These sentences, they really stuck with me because, having been on the receiving side of bias, of discrimination, of harassment, I was finding myself very angry. I was acting out. I was fighting back. All kids do when they're growing up dealing with that. And coming back to those sentences really helped me see that, we're all impacted by certain things in our life, whether it's bias, our upbringings, our religions, whatever it might be. Our views of the world are shaped by what we have gone through ourselves. And so I always remember those sentences because I went on to be a lawyer, and the work that I do today to keep reminding myself that try to keep an open mind and perspective when you're interacting with other people, because they're probably going through something of their own, and that, we're all capable of doing this to each other. And we really need to all come together so that we can make a difference going forward.
I think people have a built-in moral compass, but in the act of engaging with other people, sometimes we forget about our moral compass and let the experience drive our behavior. It's so telling what your father said to you that people are hurting inside, and that may cause them or influence them to act out so that they feel better or try to recover, or I don't know, maybe bury, not a psychologist, what they're experiencing. It's so crucial to remind ourselves or have opportunities to remind ourselves of that moral compass to get us back on track. As we grow up, younger people in particular, they may struggle with this a little bit more than adults. I know a few adults that still struggle with it.
Absolutely. It wasn't until later on in life that those words really resonated with me in the way that they impacted me and how I treat other people. But I remember very clearly when I finally became a lawyer, and now I was representing people who were actually accused of harassing and discriminating other people. So now I was on the other side representing these people. And I really had to do my own work to deal with my own biases so that I could be a good attorney and represent people and do my job well. So I had to go through my own internal process and shifting my mindset to keep those sentences in my mind and to not judge others or hold others to my preconceived notions that I had because of what I'd gone through. But then what I also saw was that when I started doing the work, I saw that a lot of people were they had their blinders on. They were on automatic pilot because of what their lived experiences were. And they just weren't open to learning, to accepting. It was more of the I'm tolerating people rather than I'm understanding and accepting of people. And really, I've made it my mission to try to educate people to see that there's so much more out there. It's so beautiful if we just start putting our egos aside, putting our biases aside, and start really looking at life differently, that it could be very different for at least our future generation. We may not see it in our lifetime, but I believe that it could be better for our children and our future generations.
As an attorney, over your history of representing people who actually have a bias and express themselves inappropriately that led to either litigation or criminal charges, first, you're in a unique position because you can influence people like that. But I'm really interested in hearing what are some of the takeaways, some of the lessons you've learned by representing these people?
A lot of it is that most of the things that I was seeing as an attorney when I was actually litigating was that a lot of the behaviors and the things that were being said and the actions that people were taking were microaggressions.
Ah,
They were stemming from their unconscious bias. And so people were saying things, doing things without even being aware that they were doing that. And a lot of the times it had continued on for so long, these behaviors, that it was becoming normal. It became normal for that company. The problem there is, how do we interrupt? How do we educate? How do we use that situation as a learning opportunity to show people a different way to respond? And also, how do we as bystanders, when we observe that kind of behavior, how do we step in the right manner? So a lot of the training that I do right now is about helping people understand what their unconscious bias is, because you can't mitigate it until you understand it and learn what it is, which is one of the reasons why I did that TEDx talk, because that word bias has just gotten such a bad negative stigma attached to it that people just shut down. They don't want to do the work, which is what we need people to do, is to do the work. And so helping people see that it's normal, it's a part of who we are. And then once we get people there, then we can give them strategies on how they can mitigate that. That's some of the stuff that I was seeing was a lot of microaggressions, and the way that our systems are set up, our legal system, or the way that companies were handling those situations was not, in my opinion, done appropriately. It needs to be more from an educational standpoint versus, okay, let's just not give them the promotion or let's fire that person, right? So I think that there was a huge gap in how we handle microaggressions. So I found myself, rather than litigating, I was educating people on how to do that. So finally, 3 years ago, I was like, you know what, let me just start my own business. And I started my company called Train Extra. And since then, prior to COVID, I was doing a lot of workshops in person, but now I do everything virtually.
you mentioned something that no one has mentioned on this show before, and that's microaggression. And I'm glad that you did that. If you would define what that is and kind of explain it.
Absolutely. We all have unconscious bias, right? Because our brain processes so much information that it categorizes all of this information that comes in into buckets. Now, some of that information that comes in is based on our emotions, our feelings, our perceptions, and our lived experiences. Some of that information is correct. Some of it is incorrect, right? But it gets filed away. And then you meet somebody for the first time and you're going to make a judgment about it because of the information that's been filed away. It's kind of like a computer system. Our brain is like a computer system, right? It's like Siri. Imagine Siri. You're looking for something on Siri, and a lot of the times it's right. Sometimes it's not. And we've all been caught in that situation where we're like, oh, I wish I could take that text message back or that thing back because that's not what I meant to say, or that's not what I meant to communicate. So those kind of judgments that we make about people, a lot of times may be inaccurate because of the amount of information. So our brain processes close to 11 million pieces of information every second. And only 50 of that is consciously processed. The rest of everything, that all the decisions we're making, we're on autopilot. It's all happening unconsciously. So microaggressions then result from your unconscious bias. So for example, in my situation, I was harassed and bullied by kids who were Italian because I grew up in an Italian neighborhood. So now let's say fast forward, I was a HR director of a company and I'm interviewing job candidates. Two people walk in, I might have a negative bias towards somebody if they were Italian based on my own lived experiences. So it's perfectly normal for me to feel that way, but it's not okay for me to make a decision against that person because of my bias against that person. So when you have these biases and you're not aware of them, you can unintentionally, unconsciously give off, you might make a statement towards somebody, you might, make a facial feature, a hand gesture, your body language, these small little things that you might do without even realizing it. They could be either micro affirmations. So based on bias in and of itself isn't good or bad. It's neither. If you have a good feeling towards somebody because of something that you've gone through, you might say something, give them a compliment. You might smile at them more. You might use a softer tone. Those would be examples of micro affirmations. Microaggressions, on the other hand, are you might make a little insult towards that person. You might take a little jab at that person. You might not smile at them. You might use a harsher tone against that person. You might not want to sit next to them. So these little things that we do are happening unintentionally, sending off these negative signals towards that person because of some bias. Unintentional bias, unconscious bias that we have against that person. So in and of itself, when you look at these individual things that are happening, they might look harmless. You might think, oh, what's the big deal? It's not a big deal. But when somebody is going through and dealing with these microaggressions every day, and they're getting hundreds of them hurled at them because of the color of their skin, their religion, their national origin, it's very harmful. The part of the word micro can be misleading because research shows that because these microaggressions are being hurled at somebody over and over again repeatedly, that they have the same harmful effect as you taking biased action against that person, being racist or sexist or overtly prejudicial towards that person. The harm, the impact is the same.
You introduced something to me that I did not consider, and that is microaggressions can be resonated as someone's tone, someone's nonverbal. And I never, in all the reading I've done on microaggressions, that was something that hasn't come up. So I'm glad you introduced that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had a case when I dealt with where an employee, a new female employee was brought onto a team, and she filed a complaint against her supervisor after a few meetings. And what she said was that he would do things like when he would go around the room and ask people what they were doing or what the status of a project was, he would either skip over her altogether. He would change his tone. He would use a more stricter, sterner tone with her than other people. He would interrupt her while she was speaking. He would dismiss her ideas. These are all different examples of microaggressions. And anybody in that situation would be uncomfortable. And so she filed a complaint. And so when we were looking at her complaint, there wasn't any protected category, of why, was it because of her race? Was it because of her religion? Was it because of her gender? There was no evidence to support that. When I met with him, within 20 minutes of us talking, we were able to identify that he had an unconscious bias towards this woman. It was because she was overweight. In his life, when he was younger, when he was around 10 years old, he was morbidly obese, where the doctors had basically told him he had 6 months to live. Otherwise, he wasn't going to be around. So can you imagine as a child being told that? Of course, that's going to leave some scars and it's going to impact that person. So he heard it over and over again that he was weak for being overweight. He needed to get stronger, that he needed to change, so he did, and he's still around. But whenever he looked at her unconsciously, he thought of her as being weak, as someone who wasn't a part of the team. The thing about unconscious bias is that it's unconscious to us, but everybody else can pick up on it. Like I said, within 15, 20 minutes of talking to him, we were able to figure it out.
And that just shows how important it is to have feedback from people around you, how important coaches are, how important it is to get educated and to experience training such as that you offer.
Exactly. Like I did in my TEDx talk, there's simple strategies that you can use. Because if you think about your unconscious bias and your conscious bias, and even if we just think about it, I replaced the word bias with beliefs, right? So if you think about your unconscious beliefs and your conscious beliefs, if you think about it, the real difference is it's a matter of speed, right? It's just a matter of slowing down your reactions to any initial judgments or biases that you might make about somebody. So I give you 3 strategies in my talk about hold off, ask why, and take action. So I walk through that with you in the TEDx talk because it really is just slowing down our reaction time. The scary part, Gary, about this is that when you start doing the work, you find out that a lot of your unconscious biases are exact opposite of what your current beliefs are, right? So you are engaging in these behaviors unintentionally that contradict what you believe now based on something that happened to you maybe years ago. So it's really important to do the work to really understand. And bias isn't a bad thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's just a part of who you are because of what you've gone through in your life. It's a matter of figuring out what it is so that you can implement these simple strategies to help you mitigate the risk that you can hurt somebody else.
Part 2, go make a difference. One of the effects of practicing leadership is influence. It happens in a number of ways. It could be just modeling a behavior. It could be something that you say that maybe you don't even remember saying it that can have a powerful effect on other people. Sometimes it comes in the form of broadcasting. And what I mean by that is communicating messages, practicing stewardship in ways that help others grow and develop. By the way, one of the 9 practices of 21st century leadership I write about is entitled Communicating Like Broadcasters. Sejal shares with us a story about a broadcaster who has dedicated his life to stewardship and helping other people grow and develop. Again, here's Sejal.
My work has primarily been related to the workplace. My entire career, I've been an employment law attorney, so I've dealt with sexual harassment, discrimination cases in the work environment. And in that time, I've seen a lot of incivility that happens in the workplace. And a lot of stress, when we're dealing with stress, I've seen when you're in toxic work environments, when people are not feeling fulfilled and they're suffering, that has been an area that I've really wanted to impact. And so I want to talk to you about a leader that I think is just phenomenal. His name is Barry Shore. He's known as the Ambassador of Joy. I attended a conference a couple months ago where he gave a presentation. I absolutely just fell in love with his presentation, with what he's doing for the world. And I ordered his book. His book is called The Joy of Living, How to Slay Stress and Be Happy. And he's on a mission to just spread joy in the world. But let me just tell you a little bit about his story, which is why it really resonates with me, this book. First of all, I think everybody on the planet needs to read this book. What happened to him was he had a great life. He was in the diamond business, a serial entrepreneur, successful in the venture capital industry. I think he had a couple brief retirements in his 30s. I mean, he was doing really well. But in September of 2004, his life changed. He ended up getting this rare neurological disease, which within a few hours, he was completely paralyzed. Only thing he can do is blink his eyes. And so he talks about in his book his recovery and his rehabilitation from full body paralysis to where he is now. And I mean, he's amazing. He became an avid swimmer. I mean, he's accumulated more than 7,000 miles. I mean, I could just talk about him for days. But his journey throughout this process to gain mobility was gone on for several years. But during this time, he came up with this acronym. And you know me by my TEDx talk that I love acronyms. And He's the acronym king, but he came up with this acronym called Go MAD, which stands for Go Make a Difference. And so in his book, he talks about 11 strategies for people to be able to live in joy and help. And he created a program around it where he helps create better workplaces to really help deal with how much stress we're under and what we can really do about it. When you start looking at the statistics around stress, and that like 70% of the people in the world are dissatisfied or depressed or unfulfilled because of stress, how we're spending trillions of dollars on lost productivity. The statistics are just out there. He's helping to create better communities, better people. He started this movement called the Keep Smiling Movement. And he creates these little cards that he sent me a whole envelope full of them, where he sends these cards out, which have all these inspirational messages. They're in 22 different languages. He's had more than over a million of these cards distributed worldwide. Talk about actually making a difference in people's lives. He set up a whole platform called Living with Joy, where there's podcasts and videos, all of this stuff that's available for free to create and spread joy in this world. And so when I think of leadership, to me, he comes to mind. I think we're all leaders, but when we can go through something like that and resilience and come out of it and then want to help create a better world, to me, that's what more leaders need to do. Be better role models for what we can do when we're in these positions of pain and really shift that to positivity to help people.
Part 3, the Platinum Rule. Leadership is not about you. It's about other people. And because it's about other people, to be effective leading, you need to understand what other people's needs are versus, say, their wants. Sejal provides some advice to help us get closer to being able to do this. Here's Sejal.
We all shift our mindset. So I think a lot of us, when we grew up and when we were looking at how do we be better to each other, right? So I look at leadership that we're all leaders, each and every single one of us. We've all grown up with what we've heard as the golden rule.
Yeah.
Treat other people in the way that we want to be treated. And I'm really out there saying we need to shift over to the platinum rule, which is let's get into the habit of treating others in the way that they want to be treated. And the only way we can do that, Gary, is by getting to know people and what they need. So again, that comes back to making time to have meaningful connections and relationships with other people. So let's get on board with the platinum rule and treat other people in the way that they want to be treated.
Meet them where they are.
Yep.
The platinum rule, it's so important. And it kind of resonates with just consultancy and what people do. If you're really good at consultancy, then you're doing that. You're trying to not sell a commodity or one purpose meets all kind of a thing, but you're really trying to figure out, well, where are these people at? What can I do to meet them where they are to best help them overcome what they're struggling with?
Yeah. And I think we just have to take individual responsibility as leaders. And that's the only way we can get collective healing and a movement towards justice for everybody.
Let's get that movement going.
That's right. I'm with you. Let's do it.
My thanks to Sejal Thakkar. If you'd like to learn more about Sejal, go to the show notes. And if you have a comment or question, go to unlabelleadership.com. Click the message icon and you can leave a voicemail message up to 1 minute. I'd like to thank those who contribute to the show. Your contributions help offset some of the production expenses, and it makes a difference because this is a volunteer service. Lastly, I'd like to thank you for listening. Until next time, lead on.